Thank you again, Tony, so much for being willing to do this. So we are interviewing the editors in chief of the Journal of Vocational Behavior over the last 50 years,
Uh-huh.
as many as are willing to be interviewed. Lenore is not able to be joining in an interview, and Mark, I think, wants to do something in writing. But I've interviewed Sam and Nancy, and I'm thrilled to get a chance to interview you. And you were editor from 1990 to,
99, thereabouts.
okay, yeah, great. And I was
But
one of your associate editors.
yes, you were an associate editor. Yes, you were one of the superstars.
So I'm really interested to hear your perspectives as editor, what your challenges were, what your initiatives were, your thoughts about the journal. I would just love to hear that. So coming in as editor in 1990, and you took over from Nancy. So what were your thoughts as you became editor? At that point, it was almost 20 years, right?
Yes, well, it was, I mean, I think my thoughts were fairly typical of any incoming editor. I think every incoming editor really wants to do something special for the journal. They want to maintain the integrity and the quality that has handed off to them. In my case, Nancy Betts had done a wonderful job with the journal, and that was a great foundation upon which to build. And I wanted to increase the submissions to the journal. I wanted to continue to improve the quality of the journal. Um, I suppose one perspective I brought that could be different from some editors, but I never saw my job as rejecting articles. I always tried to approach every article with the mindset of how can this research be saved? Because most research, even the research that makes it into the journal, has some flaws. And so, uh, as an editor, I wanted to be able to help the authors improve their work to the point where the Journal of Vocational Behavior could publish it if that were possible. As you know, there's a depressingly large amount of work that just simply can't be saved. But it's never done with uh, pleasure to have to reject somebody, because somebody spent a lot of time and effort, resources to provide this information. And so I think my point of view was to try to help them make it publishable if at all possible. The I guess I had a couple of overriding objectives. One was very clear at the beginning, and I even talked about that when I suppose the situation's the same now, but when I became editor, it was under Academic Press, and while they made a tentative decision, I thought it was a final decision, but it became very clear to me once I got to San Diego that it was a tentative decision, and the CEO and the other executives at Academic Press had to sign off on my selection as editor. But one of the things I talked to them about was the positioning of JVB and kind of the universe of vocational publications. And I explained to them that I saw a continuum from IO psychology on one end down to counseling psychology on the other end. And I thought that Journal of Vocational Behavior should be an outlet for publications all the way along that continuum, because that's all vocational psychology. And I felt like at the time that one area where we were underrepresented was at the IO end, because the journal was founded by Sam and it was led by Lenore and Nancy and then myself, all of whom were counseling psychologists. And so counseling psychologists naturally gravitated to the journal, whereas IO psychologists didn't see that, or automatically at least see that as an outlet. So one of the things I wanted to do was to expand the journal or expand the visibility of the journal, to increase the visibility of the journal in the eyes of the IO scholars and researchers. along the same lines, I also thought that sociology was another discipline and had a much smaller cohort of scholars engaged in research on vocations and on work occupations, but it was there and it provided a refreshingly different perspective from that of the psychologist. So I wanted to increase the visibility of the journal in the eyes of sociologists who were investigating research. And finally, and the area where I was really least successful, probably not successful at all, was there was just a very small cohort of people in the park and recreation and leisure psychology discipline who were studying leisure in a way that was consistent or sympathetic with vocational psychology. And I wanted to try to
Mm,
uh, attract some work there. But the truth of the matter was, it wasn't a very big cohort. Seppo Isola retired, I retired, and we were probably the two most active. And so I don't think I was successful at all in increasing participation from park and recreation people. But I think we were quite successful in making the journal a place for IO psychologists and somewhat, but less successful with the sociologists.
So you are the first to have associate editors, right?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, because Nancy didn't have associate editors. So, but you chose associate editors, one from Voc Psych and one from IO Psych.
That's the way it evolved. I think uh, I've, it's been so many years now, I can't be sure, but I think that was certainly the way it was after the first couple of 3 years.
Okay.
And I can't remember if that was the way it was at the very beginning or if it was whether it was only one. Uh,
So what would you say were I mean, you've talked about a couple of them, but what were your initiatives? Uh, uh, I know, for example, you did special issues, you commissioned some articles. What were your initiatives?
well, that was my initiatives were basically in pursuit of the objective that I talked to you about of increasing the visibility of the journal across the entire universe of scholars engaged in vocational psychology. Um, at the same time, I'd done an annual review and I found those to be almost impossible to write, almost impossible to edit, and then not particularly useful after they were done because at the online search engines were emerging. APA was publishing their online, uh, it used to be, anyway, I forget what they call it now, but essentially it was quickly becoming possible to go online and look up relevant work. And so the annual reviews as they were constructed, I thought had outlived their usefulness. So I tried to move them towards thematic issues. And so we did reviews on emerging issues. What I tried to do with not only the annual reviews, but the special issues was to signal to the discipline that the Journal of Vocational Behavior is interested in this topic and that this is a suitable outlet for this kind of research. And so we published special issues and we published annual reviews on topics like sexual harassment, um, uh, gay and lesbian experiences in the workplace, racial identity, all of those topics that I think were beginning to emerge. There were certainly a small cohort of scholars engaged in that research, but it wasn't big enough that that we would just kind of automatically recognize, oh, so and so is the expert in this area or such and such. And so the special issues and the reviews allowed me to identify a, an individual who was a decided leader in that area and then bring that person on board and have them help find the others who they thought were actively engaged and had something to say in the area. but that I wouldn't necessarily know who they were. Uh, and so I thought that probably worked quite well. This not only the special issues, but the reviews, because they both were kind of designed to take us in that same direction.
Interesting, Tony. And I wrote one of those annual reviews. It's a lot of work, right? It's a
Well,
lot of work.
you edited one of the special issues too.
Yeah, yeah, I did. So, and interestingly, one of the still the most downloaded. You're probably going to know what I'm going to say is the most downloaded, and most cited article from your tenure as an editor is a monograph on social cognitive career theory. Do
Hmm.
you remember that process?
Uh, are you talking about the one I published after I was editor?
Lent, Brown, and Hackett.
What's that? Oh
The
no.
Lent, Brown, and Hackett one.
Yes. Well, I remember having asked them to do it, but I don't. I mean, it was a review, I believe, and uh, but I don't remember any more details than that.
Okay.
Uh, I tried to. I tried to cover everything. And so we had a special issue on Holland's theory and the structural integrity of Holland's theory. We also had one
Right.
on the theory of work adjustment, but social cognitive theory was I would say not quite on the same footing, particularly as Holland's theory at the time, but it very clearly had some important things to say, and it very clearly had an active, enthusiastic cohort of scholars who were working in that area, and so Hackett and Lent and Steve Brown were like the leaders in that area, and so it was a natural, almost a logical decision to have an issue on that.
So Tony, when you look back, one of the challenges we continue to have, and I'm working hard on this anniversary issue to identify areas that we could bridge IO and vocational psychology. And there are actually many areas we can do that in. Career adaptability in one is an example. Career transitions is another example. Career decision making is another example.
Yes.
When you think back, was that a challenge that those were really discrete areas, or did you see ways that they could coalesce?
Well, to me, it was a challenge. Uh, Not only that they weren't integrated yet, but also that they weren't coming to the Journal of Vocational Behavior, and that was often my uh, objective, was to try to alert the discipline to the fact that we were interested in those kinds of manuscripts, and so we had. Uh, we would put things together, like we would chain personnel decisions and affirmative action or things like that together to try to put them in an IO context, but also in a context that would be interesting to counseling psychologists.
Hmm.
I can't remember all of the um, different topics. I mean, we did some things on adolescent psychology and adolescence in the workforce. We did some things on midlife career development, because so
That's
much of
right.
it is focused on when people are just starting their career. Uh, and we did school to work transitions. So we did a lot of things that I think had not really been uh, given a lot of attention by at least by the journal, maybe not by IO, maybe not by counseling, but were valid issues that really I thought deserved attention.
Interesting. So how many submissions did you have when you were editor? Do you remember? I'm just thinking how much it's grown.
Not enough. That's all I could say, is there were never enough. I, uh, I'll give you a number off the top of my head, and it may be wrong, but I think it was around 125, 150. Uh, it's nothing like what, I mean, when Mark took over, he had the one thing he had the amazing ability to do was to, I guess, to increase the number of submissions remarkably. And that was always one of my goals. And so I'm never really asked him how he managed to do it, uh, but but yeah, I'd say that there just simply weren't enough because we did not want to lower the quality of the work that we accepted,
Right,
but we also needed to fill the journal. I mean, the
right.
journal committed to publishing on a regular schedule, and we needed to find a way to have quality work. So the special issues and the invited issue articles also helped that purpose because then I could count on uh, like the second issue of such and such a volume uh, being taken up with a special issue. That allowed us to then maintain the quality, the standard that the journal had set, while at the same time meeting the publication deadlines.
Interesting. So were you editor as the tech, how did increasing technology affect what you were doing as an editor?
Oh, that was a godsend because when we first started, when you were an associate editor and I was starting, we had I mean, the manuscripts would come in print form to the office in San Diego, and they would do some processing and send us information. Then we would pick the reviewers, and then they'd mail the manuscripts out to the reviewers. After that, and the reviewers would send us the reviews. But that process was it worked smoothly, it worked well, but it also had its limitations, and the limitations meant that we had to pick people who could get mail we could get mail to in a timely manner. And so when we started being able to use a digital uh, transmission of manuscripts, then allowed us to open the journal internationally. And so then we brought on Beryl Hesketh in Australia as an associate editor,
Right,
and
she was
Ida
one.
Morgani was on the board, and a couple of scholars in Canada. I mean, you wouldn't believe it, but it was almost impossible to get manuscripts into Canada in any sort of a reasonable time frame. And so being able to transmit work digitally allowed us to then include scholars from Canada on the board. And so that was, I think that was, I had four people, I think, Itamar and Beryl, and Nancy Allen at Western Ontario, and Alan Sachs at Toronto, and I think he subsequently moved to York. Those were the four that I was able to bring on board. And that was only in the last half of my tenure. Um, we just started, we had you maybe remember, we had a workshop, I think it was in Chicago, on digital submission. And Nikki Levy was a wonderful person to work with, and she put together that presentation. I remember it was kind of funny because they had uh, trouble with it because they couldn't get some of the machinery to work. And so here we were going to have digital submission, and we couldn't even do a presentation digitally. But anyway, the idea was if we could have digital submissions and we could move them around digitally, then we could include the whole world. Scholars everywhere could submit articles, they could be on the board, they could be considered as an associate editor. And there were a lot of very talented people, Itamar and Beryl. I mean, just are a couple of examples of people who are absolutely leading scholars that there was no way that they could have been included on the board earlier. But once we were able to transmit manuscripts digitally, then that became a possibility.
And now Elsevier, our publisher in Elsevier is in the Netherlands, and associate editors in England and Switzerland and the Netherlands.
Yes, yes.
Well, all over the world, and international submissions, and 160 editorial board members, many of whom are international.
That's astonishing. It is. It's
Yeah,
just a totally different journal now than it was. I
yeah.
mean, when I was editor, it was more like this little thing. Now it's massive.
Have you thoughts now about what it is now?
Uh, well, I've thought that. I'm glad I'm not doing it. If that counts. Uh, uh, no, I haven't done. I don't claim to have a lot of insights to vocational psychology now. I think one of the things for an editor is to, if you don't have a set term, I did Journal of Vocational Behavior before Mark. I had done it longer than anybody, but still you need to, uh, when you come in, you have energy, you have enthusiasm, and you need to be able to self-evaluate and know when you're kind of starting to um, run on habit or run on tradition. And so I felt like when I told Nikki that I was basically about done, I mean, I felt like that was a good time for me to go because I had a lot of ideas and I felt like I had been able to implement most of them. And I didn't want to just kind of like start repeating myself and doing the same thing over and over again. Um, and it freed me up to do some additional things too. So I moved on to other kinds of things after that. And so I think it was a smart decision to pass it on to others. And I think Mark did a good job and you're going to do a superb job, or you are doing a superb job.
Well, thank you. I learned so much from you, Tony. It was your perspective on how to be a developmental editor was hugely influential for me. That the important part about being an editor is, even if you're not going to accept a manuscript, that you provide some feedback to the author, because that's part of the scholarly process. So it
Yes.
was hugely influential. Thank you.
And treat them with respect. I mean, I mean,
Absolutely.
we've all, I've had, when I would get a review, I would sometimes have to like read the review, when I would submit a paper and I would get like two reviews, each were 3 pages long, and then the editor's letter. I'd have to read those 1 page a day because it's so painful to get that kind of criticism that tells you where you screwed up and what you should have done. And,
What you should have
and
done.
so I empathized with authors whose work we weren't going to be able to accept. I know that it really was important to them for us to accept it, and they needed to be treated with respect.
Absolutely. It's all part of the process. And I think, honestly, JVB has a reputation, I hope my goal is that JVB has a reputation that even if we don't accept your manuscript, you get good feedback from us.
Yes,
So that's something I really try to impress on the associate editors, to give that kind of developmental feedback. Yeah.
yes, I think that's accurate. That's my perception, is that people regard the journal as a class act. Not only did we give feedback, but we gave it in a timely manner. It wasn't one of those things where you sent in a manuscript and 6 months later you were calling the editor to try to find out what they were doing with it. So we tried to give them timely feedback and constructive feedback. Uh, I also liked working with you and with Beryl and with Jeff Greenhouse as a board. It was kind of like a team, uh, and it was gratifying to be able to identify really top scholars and bring them on and have a sense of teamwork rather than just kind of sitting there being like, oh, you're the editor and you sit in your room. I mean, as a reviewer or an editor, you spend a lot of time sitting in a room by yourself reading manuscripts anyway. So it's kind of nice to have a team that you're working with rather than feeling like you're doing it all by yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely. I do remember telling you that I would be dragging manuscripts from, from place to place to place. You
Yes,
sympathized with me because you were dragging them from home
yes.
to work to back home, right?
I
But
remember,
that's in the days we would do files.
oh, yes, yes. I had file cabinets full of manuscripts.
Yes, yes.
When I retired, I left them behind at SIU. When I retired from SIU and went to Florida, I left them behind thinking, I usually tried to keep them until they were actually appeared in print. And I got a message that says, we need this file cabinet. Get up here and empty it out. So next time I was in town, I had to go and empty out all of those manuscripts.
Well, I hope you're doing well. I really appreciate your being willing to talk about this. It's such a treat to go back and do a little, remembering of the journal and the history of the journal. So
Yes, it
thank you
is.
so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I suppose I should say thank you for taking this on. I mean, it's amazing that after coming off of JCP or I mean, TCP, you're now taking this on. I mean, you're really uh, have stamina.
Well, I will say, one of the interesting things about being editor of TCP is the breadth of the counseling psychologist. As the divisional journal for Society of Counseling Psychology, there was such a breadth of types of manuscripts that came in. I, I was going to say, but I will say, and the joy of getting to be editor of the Journal of Vocational Behavior is that it is so in my wheelhouse, and it's such great fun to read read what's coming in and read in the vocational area. The novel thoughts people are starting to investigate. Of course, the other reality is we're on pace, I think, for 900 to 1,000 manuscripts this year, and we reject 93%. So I read a lot of manuscripts that don't get published, but I
Yeah.
still get the breadth of articles that or manuscripts, the breadth of research people are doing in the world, actually, because again, we're very international now.
Yeah. And so like from 125 to 150 to 900 to 1,000. I mean, that's 10 times more.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it does speak to people's interest in studying work. And
Mhm.
I think it speaks to, again, the international perspective, but very different, the role of the careers researcher in Europe and in Asia and in Australia, very different than the counseling psychologist here in this country. So I think that's been one of our issues, is to span those professions,
Yes.
and the research, uh, what's the word I want? Research traditions in those professions.
Well,
One of the,
I
go ahead.
mentioned the digital submission and the digital developments as an ability to expand the editorial board. But that's the other thing I should have mentioned is that also prevented scholars from Europe and Asia and around the world from submitting to the Journal of Vocational Behavior because it was so costly and so time consuming even to get a manuscript over here. And and you're right, there's just a tremendous amount of work being done elsewhere that has different perspectives and they're enriching. If you can put those in the journal, they'll enrich the experience of everybody involved in career research.
Exactly. Exactly. I think of Itamar's, career decision-making difficulties research in the 90s, thinking he must have sent, 12 copies of a manuscript over
Yes.
here in the 90s, and Graham Stead's work from South Africa. So really the incredible perseverance of those scholars to submit
Mhm.
their work to the journal, it really is very different now. It's
Mhm.
very different digitally, yeah, to do that digitally. All
Well,
right, thank you.
all right. I appreciate being asked. And thank,
Absolutely. Thank you for your contribution to the journal.
good. All right.
All right. Thanks.